So I grew up in Colorado Springs. I was actually born in Montana, and then we moved to actually Southern California when Focus on the Family was still based in Southern California in the very early days. And then when they moved to Colorado Springs in 1991, we migrated with them. And so that was where I really spent most of my growing up years. And a lot of evangelical ministries moved into Colorado Springs around that same time. And so it became kind of this mecca of evangelical ministries. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom who homeschooled us K through 12. My dad worked at Focus on the Family. And so that was really my world. That was really all that I knew, was to be kind of inculcated in this Christian bubble. And people would look at me and say, well, you just have the perfect family. You know, everything must be so perfect. And in many ways it was. My parents did a lot of things very well. And so I'm very thankful for that. And yet I was very much cocooned in this Christian bubble where I wasn't really exposed to diversity at all, whether that was people of color or people with disabilities or certainly the LGBTQ community, right? Like that was very far out there. And so my world was small. It was very black and white. Things were very right and wrong. And so we were kind of deemed as like the chosen people of God, right? That was supposed to go out and minister to as many people as possible and bring them into the fold. That was like our mission, and to be a blessing to others. So I felt like I always had to kind of wear this facade all the time, or at least appear to be happy,
right,
and have it put together, because that was just what Christian people did. You were supposed to be a blessing to other people, which kind of meant you always had to have it all together, you know? And so I started feeling that pressure as I grew older, to uphold the family name, to represent my family well, because everybody knew what my dad did, everybody knew who my mom was. She was kind of a pillar in the homeschool community. And so really that was who I became in essence in a lot of ways. And that started to weigh on me as I got older.
When I was reading your book, and her first book is her memoir, and it is worth it. Everybody, you need to read this, because as someone who grew up evangelical, you were living in like the dream. As I'm reading how perfect your family was, how perfect the traditions that you guys did. Do y'all remember the show that was on? Many of y'all remember Focus on the Family? Do y'all know what we're talking about, Focus on the Family? Do you remember the show Adventures in Odyssey? It was. Do you know she was one of the voice actors as a teenager on Adventures in Odyssey? So I'm reading this and I'm thinking, I would have held you guys in such esteem. And then I'm realizing that there's a little girl in the middle of all of this that is feeling some pressures and some things that aren't so perfect.
Right, and there was, like I said, there was a lot of wonderful things about it, and I attributed that to my parents, because there was a lot. I mean, they worked hard to pay for music lessons, and you know, my mom taught us to perform from a very young age, and those are things I still look back on very fondly. But I did start feeling that pressure, and you know, our range of emotions at home were very limited. So you could be happy or blessed or excited, but there wasn't room for emotions of sadness or anger or disappointment. And so learning to navigate that was hard, because I felt like you always had to be over here. There was no room to be over here. And that began to weigh on me more as I got older. As I went into my teen years, I started wrestling with more anxiety, more depression, and especially as I moved into like purity culture and into my teens, I just started to feel that pressure to uphold the family name and to represent my family well. And so it's like that came with a certain amount of responsibility. And so as I grew up and then moved into my teens, I was heavily involved in the purity culture. That was a huge part of my upbringing. When I was 13 years old, my family had a big like coming of age, coming into womanhood ceremony, and all my friends and family came around, and we did this huge. Everything was steeped in symbolism and meaning. And my dad gave me this purity ring that had a cross and a heart, and symbolized that God held the key to my heart, until I got married. Oh, you're on now, aren't you? And so and I signed this vow, that I would save sex for marriage. And I think that what I didn't realize at the time was how much that really masked my ability to understand my sexual orientation earlier on. Right. So I didn't realize I was gay till I was about 23, 24 years old. And that's because this belief of purity culture was that if you just follow God with your life and you just do the next right thing, eventually your knight in shining armor is going to come in on a white horse and sweep you off your feet to happily ever after. And so I just kept waiting for that, and I just kept serving God, and I just kept doing the next right thing. Even in the midst of a lot of struggle, I had a very close relationship with God. And so I was at New Life Church for 14 years, a big mega church, and that was a place of great safety for me for a lot of those teenage years. You know, like a lot of people will ask me, well, how did you hold on to your faith through everything and through the coming out and all the grief and loss? And I really attribute a lot of it to those teenage years when, you know, I didn't really have a safe place to go. I didn't really have a safe person to go to. And I would just sit in the back of my church for hours every week with my Bible and worship music and my journal and just write out my heart to God. And I really think that foundation of being able to do that solidified kind of for me the difference between knowing God for myself and having a personal relationship with God and what people were doing to me in the name of God.
Right.
And so I think being able to make that distinction really helped me navigate those coming years.
I was blown away, and I also was blown away. You were this gifted musician. You graduated high school at 16, graduated college at 18. She graduates from college, and you're living in this world, and yet because of a little bit of OCD and some perfectionistic kind of things, you're experiencing anxiety, depression, pulling your hair, and eventually even cutting yourself kind of as a way to deal with some of this trauma or stress that you're feeling?
Mm-hmm. And I did have a couple traumatic events in my childhood without any safe outlet to really process those. And so I think the combination of all those things, and when I look back now, I can see the fact that I was gay from a very early age, but I did not have the exposure or the vocabulary to be able to put those terms or those labels on it. And so that just was a part of, I think, the angst that was growing inside of me, is that I knew I didn't fit in, I knew I didn't belong, but I didn't know why, because I didn't have those pieces of information that I needed to put it all together.
One of the things I was just thinking, we were talking, we have friends, of course, family members who aren't inclusive and affirming in their world at all, and they hear of a church like this church, and they think, well, why are you exposing children to people who are different than maybe what they think is the norm and what it should be? And it's like I think of your story and I think, why wouldn't I want my grandchildren to be around fabulous gay people and fabulous our transgender siblings? Why wouldn't I want my grandkids to grow up so they know in the full expression of life, whatever it is, they belong, they fit, and not like, I don't even know what's going on.
Yeah, and even as we were talking earlier today about internalized homophobia, if you're exposed to diversity from a young age, that doesn't grow inside of you the same way as if you're only exposed to people that are straight, heteronormative, all these things. It becomes easier to identify yourself and to accept yourself because you see diversity everywhere around you and you see that being celebrated. And so you learn to be able to celebrate that within yourself.
Let me ask you something. One of the stories that really moved me, you meet someone named Brooke in the book named Brooke, and you begin to experience feelings you've never known before, and Brooke ends up not only being kind of a love for you, but then Brooke outs you to your parents. That sucked.
Yeah, that sucked is right.
Yeah. Talk about that just a minute.
Well, that's a lot to talk about for just a minute, but falling in love with Brooke was my epiphany of horror, because it was like, oh crap.
I bet.
Like, this is the one thing that is never supposed to happen, And I had never felt those feelings before, and I had never experienced that, and so it was a shocker. And then you have your hierarchy of sin, and that tops out at the very top of what you're not supposed to be as a Christian. And I just didn't know what to do. And then she outs me in the middle of the night, takes off, and my parents show up on the doorstep at 6:30 the next morning and interrogate me. And it was very much, well, one, they said, Amber, don't ever tell anybody about this, because if you do, it will ruin your reputation forever. And I think they were more scared of it ruining their reputation forever. And so it kind of ended up getting swept under the rug as this big mistake that never should have happened. And we're just not really going to talk about it, and we're going to move on like everything's fine. And you're still going to find your knight in shining armor, and you're still going to go on and do all these things that we have expected for you to do. And so it kind of just was the elephant in the room that you didn't talk about. Meanwhile, I didn't tell anybody, and I retreated further into the closet, which only made me spiral further downward because the amount of shame and guilt that I held inside of me and that I was carrying around was eating me alive. And so I was dealing with a great amount of self-injury and self-hatred and suicidal ideations, and it was a dark spiral. And so it eventually came to the point where I realized I'm either going to have to look this thing in the face, or it's going to be the thing that kills me.
Right.
And so I didn't even know where to start. Like, where do you even start? When you think, when you're that perfect Christian inside this bubble, you have no idea that places like this even exist.
Right.
Like, you think you are the only person in the world that could possibly show up gay in a conservative Christian family. You have no exposure to the outside of what is possible for you. And so I didn't even know where to start. And of course, the resources we have now are greatly different than what we had back then, 10 years ago even. Like, it has grown so much over the last decade. So I just did the best that I had with what the best I could with what I had. I didn't even know where to start, and so I put myself in therapy, which was a really great idea.
How did you find how did you have the wisdom to you knew not to go to a evangelical church therapist, that wasn't going to be...
That I did know.
Right.
Because we did try to go to our pastor, who then spread it through other pastors, that became a whole nightmare mess too. So I knew not to go to church. I knew not to go to my family. I knew all of that was headed towards reparative therapy, and that wasn't going to be helpful. Because I already knew how to hate myself. I didn't need somebody to teach me that. So I needed somebody that was going to help me figure a way out. And a friend of mine had just recommended a therapist that she knew. And I don't know that I had the wisdom at the time to be like, I think I knew this is outside the realm of conservative Christian therapists. But I don't know that I had the language that I do now to say this is what you want to look for in a therapist. But it just happened to be a great fit. And she respected my faith journey. She respected my journey with trying to discover my sexuality and how those might fit together. She let me bring my dog with me, which was very therapeutic, And so those things all just really helped me navigate my emotions for the first time in a place that I had never had that before, to be able to experience the full range of emotions, And that was really helpful to start identifying some of those things that I was feeling and experiencing that I was really good at stuffing stuff down really, really far and just pretending it didn't exist. And so the therapy was a huge part of my process of acceptance.
And so was this the time that you decided to look up and see if there was an affirming church?
Yeah, that was in the process of all that. I finally kind of was at my wit's end of these things I don't think can ever coexist, but I'm just going to try. And there's a lot of fear behind that too, because of what you've been taught, that they've thrown the Bible out the window, that they disrespect the Word of God, that they are heretic, all the negative stereotypes that you have built up in your head is what you've been taught that this group of people is. And I didn't want to be pegged as that because I still loved God very deeply. And so I really I didn't want to just justify my way of life, like people tell you. I really wanted to know what the Bible said, and I really wanted to know what God thought. And I was just as terrified to find out that God was okay with me being gay as I was to find out that God was not okay with me being gay, because I knew that either way my life was going to drastically change forever.
So you look up, you're still 30 miles, I guess, from Denver, maybe farther?
Yeah, more like 70.
70 miles. So you look up and you find a church in Denver that seems like it may be a place that you could go and hear the other side of the story?
Yeah. And so I was terrified, and I reached out to the pastor, and he very quickly responded with a warm welcome and invited me to come. And I was so terrified that first Sunday I drove up there, I didn't know what to expect or what I was going to find. I think I had equated it to Pride Parade in church, And
So you thought they were going to be wearing chaps with butts hanging out and stuff like that?
Yeah, drag queens and people making out everywhere, the whole 9 yards, And I walked in and I was like, these people all look just like me.
Amazing.
And it was amazing. And they were just normal people loving each other and loving God. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And as I saw them interact with each other and their love for their partner and their spouse and their love for God with no conflict in between, I was like, I realized that day that it was possible. And I remember going home and writing in my journal that night something to the effect of, I've passed the point of no return. Like, there's no going back because I saw that it was possible. And I can't go back to this suffocating life that I've been living.
That is so beautiful. That's so beautiful. You wrote in your book, you said, my heart had camped in the midst of angst, worry, fear, and doubt for so long. But eventually I realized these are not the attributes of God. And then you used the scripture. Jesus said, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. And you said the love you experienced when attending that church and the peace you began to feel deep inside about your sexuality, the joy you found in knowing that you're beautifully unique, these were the fruits of the Spirit that told me I was in a good and healthy place. You're a gifted writer. That is just beautiful. I just cried. I just would read that and I think, my stars. That's
Well,
so
and it was
perfect.
so true because in my life I had struggled for so long. I just was always wrestling, always struggling, never really at peace. And those are not the fruits of God, self-hatred and self-loathing and self-harm. And, like these are not attributes of God. And when I finally made the step to come out, and I know I'm getting a bit ahead of the story, but when I made that step, it was like chains and shackles fell off of me. And I felt so free and alive for the first time. And I was like, these are the attributes of God, the joy that I felt like finally feeling at home in my own skin and finally realizing that I had found the peace that was missing all my life. And it was just so liberating to be able to walk into that, even in the midst of all that was going on in terms of grief and loss with family.
So you're going to this church, you're meeting new friends, you're feeling, but you're totally in a separate city. When you're there, it's a different world, and you finally realize it's time to come out?
I think when I had finally gotten all the pieces I needed to reconcile my faith with my sexuality and understand who I was and be okay with who I was, and then find that affirming community and have that support when I felt like, because I was pretty strategic about it. Like I was very careful about not coming out to my family until I was ready. And so I was pretty strategic in the way that I did that. But once I had all those pieces in place, I knew I was going to have to come out. Like there was no going around that. It's not like some families who like live on opposite sides of the country and see each other once a year and they just kind of fake it, Like that would never work. We all lived within a mile of each other. We talked every day. We did everything together. We were the focus on the family, And so I knew that I was going to have to come out. And I sat my parents down one day and told them my story and told them the journey that I had been on and the journey that I had taken with God, because I knew that was going to be their greatest fear, right? And they just glazed over with this deer in the headlights look. And I don't know that they heard a word that I said. And I waited to say, like the big G word until the very end, because I knew that like that was going to kind of be the end. And I finally got it out and I finally said it. And it was the most vulnerable I've ever felt. And it just hung in the air. And my dad just looked at me and he said, I have nothing to say to you. And he got up and walked out the door. And so that was devastating, like that rejection, immediate rejection was devastating, because there was no amount of like trying to seek to understand or really listen to where my heart had been and the journey that I'd taken. And then we didn't speak for like 3 weeks, which was an eternity for my family, And when we did, it was another interrogation of, they compared me to murderers and to pedophiles and said, we feel like you've died. How dare you do this to our family? You're so selfish. And it was just heart-wrenching for me to hear that from your own parents, And then as I got ready to leave, my dad asked me for the keys to the house back. And, I wasn't living there, but that was my childhood home. That's where I had grown up and, always stopped by for different things. And he asked for the keys to the house back and said they no longer felt safe with me having access to their home.
I can't tell you, I know Jane will remember, I was reading your book and big tears rolling down my face. When I met you today, and I'm dead serious, I'm giving you the code to my back door, and you have it forever, because I just couldn't imagine what it felt like. You're a good person, and you've been on this journey with God, and to have that response, that was tough. And then your dad even had surgery afterward, and you were taking care of him.
Yeah.
But nothing changed.
No, nothing changed. And I think part of me I didn't do it with the hopes of something that would change. I did it because it's the right thing to do.
Right thing to do.
But I think there was a part of me that was hoping that somehow that kind of end of life experience would have changed or softened him a bit, and it just didn't in the least at all. So that was hard too, because it just as time went on, we just kept getting further and further apart. And then that about a year after that experience, after he was sick, not even a year. It was about probably 8 months is when I got married, and I had no family at my wedding. And I was grateful for the affirming community that I had, because they're the ones that stepped up and stood in for my parents where they should have been, But nothing replaces your family. Like, we can never get those years back. I feel like they've missed the happiest years of my life, They've never seen this Amber. They've never known me, because I always struggled. So they've never seen this person who is confident and comfortable in her skin and at peace and has joy. They've never seen that part of me. So I feel like they've missed the happiest years of my life as I got married and bought a house and family, that kind of stuff. So nothing replaces that. You just continue to grieve layers of loss, over time. But then you also meet other incredible people, and you build community with them, and they're rich and they're authentic. And I felt like I lived kind of in this Barbie doll world where everybody just wore a mask all the time and nobody was real with each other. And people on this side are, you don't just end up here. You have to go through some stuff to get here, it's a journey. So the people that are here are rich and authentic and deep, and I've just met some of the most incredible people.
I love that. Hey, you mentioned her earlier, Half Pint. Half Pint was helpful for you.
Half Pint was very helpful for me, and she's traveled with me a lot over the last few years, and in recent months, not as much, because my health is changing in other ways, and become challenging, but she's been a service dog for PTSD for a number of years, and she was really a lifesaver for me. And she's very mad that she's not here, by the way. I've gotten pictures. She's not happy. And so, but she was very instrumental in just having that heartbeat, having that connection with somebody, where you have a reason to stay alive. And we've bonded very quickly. And so over time, as things with my family went so far south, I talked to my doctor about having her trained as a service dog, and she wholeheartedly approved, was like, oh, I think that's a great idea, And it wasn't hard to do, because she was already so inclined to my emotions and to what I was going through, and she still does a beautiful job of that, even though she can't be with me all the time. So I really think my affirming community and having Half Pint are the things that really saved my life in those tough times.
So you're dealing with this with your family, you're going to this church, your life is opening up, and you meet Clara. How did that happen?
Well, we met at the affirming church that I was attending, and I was single when I came out, and I met her the following year, and it was really kind of perfect timing after I had gone through.
Did you date a lot? Did you date?
I did not date a lot. I really didn't date. I didn't date at all. After I came out, before I met Clara. She was the first person I dated after I came out, because that year was very hard, and I was not in a place where I was ready to date.
Right.
And so I didn't date at all that year. I dated some in this season where I was like trying to figure things out, and like, am I sure I'm gay? Am I bi? Am I... Maybe, the whole thing of like, well, you just need to date guys because you haven't dated guys, and so you just need to date guys to find out that you're not gay, I did the whole thing. Still gay.
That didn't.
Still gay.
Yeah.
So I did all that, but then when I came out, I didn't date at all that year, and then Claire was the first person I dated after that.
And she came to hear you speak at the church.
She did, yeah. I was sharing my life story that morning, and she just happened to show up and be there for one of the first times at that church. And we met there, and then a couple months later started dating, and it moved pretty quickly. We only... Between when we met and when we got married was only about a year and a half, so it moved fairly quickly.
In your wedding, I've seen pictures. It looked like it was a beautiful.
This is a picture, actually. This is our wedding.
On the book, yes.
On the book, yeah.
That's beautiful.
So it was a great day. You know, that season was so wonderful and still so challenging because you're falling in love for the first time, but you can't share that with your family, and you're dealing with all this grief and loss, but you're falling in love, and all these beautiful things are happening. And so it felt like such a roller coaster of emotions, where it was like the things you'd always dreamed of are finally happening, and yet your family's falling apart. And, you know, like I remember seasons of just intense nightmares leading up to the wedding, and knowing that my family wasn't going to be a part. And, you know, I was sobbing so hard in my sleep, I'd wake myself up because I was crying so hard, you know. And so there were very difficult moments in the midst of that.
I know she's a friend of yours. She's a friend of ours, Sarah Cunningham and Liz Dyer, and some of that group of people who have said, hey, if you're having a wedding and your mom and dad won't come, you let us know and we'll be there for you.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you had
grateful
some
for them.
supportive friends, and I know that they have become really good friends.
Yes, they are. I have so much respect for both of them. I think they're doing such amazing work in the world.
Well, y'all, this is that book that she's been talking about thus far, The Refocusing My Family, and I could not recommend a book higher to everyone. It's going to become, I'm going to give it out to people that have maybe wondered about being Christian and gay, because it was just so obvious that you loved God as you're wrestling with this. Can this be? And I found it to be a beautiful, beautiful example. Now I want to move to us talking about this book a little bit. So I'm assuming there were years between that book and this book, and you just kind of took a sabbatical.
I wish.
How did that happen?
I wish. No, this book had only been out for about 3 months before I got approached for that book. And, you know, writing a memoir is not easy, to figure out how to share all of your vulnerable pieces of your life with the world. And it was a grueling process. I went through every document, every journal entry, every scrapbook. I reviewed my entire life from the very beginning and tried to pull out the threads that I felt like people would identify with the most. And so it was a tough process. And so when I was approached 3 months later for this one, I was like, not even close, don't even talk to me. But when God tells you to write a book, you write a book. And so I literally came off tour for this and had foot surgery and wrote that in 6 to 8 weeks while I recovered from foot surgery at home. But, you know, I quickly realized the need for it, because what I was seeing on the road was, one, people were asking the same questions over and over and over of, how do I know when I'm ready to come out? What if my parents are in ministry? What if I'm in ministry? You know, just the same, it just felt like they were on repeat. The emails that I was getting and the messages and the people I met, all asking the same questions. And then I realized, too, that we've got some great resources that are helping people reconcile their faith with their sexuality, but nothing after that to help them navigate the journey forward of, okay, I'm gay and I'm Christian, or I'm trans and I'm Christian, now what? And so this is a holistic approach to help them navigate that process moving forward. And I take all the most commonly asked questions that I've received on the road and the stories of a few other people that have allowed me to share their stories and compiled it into what I hope is a helpful guide.
And it's very helpful. I love that you start right away, too, with lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their straight peers. And LGB youth who come from highly rejecting families are over 8 times more likely to attempt suicide compared to their LGB peers who report no or low levels of family rejection. And then 40% of transgender adults have reported attempting suicide, with 92% of them doing so before age 25. And so I could just tell that this was, as you became immersed in what people were going through and you realized it wasn't just you, I could see you were really drawn into this is something that you have to do.
Yeah, well, because it's so vital, because the majority of those people who are rejected by their families are rejected for religious reasons. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think, is where the problem stems. And so I feel like I've got a critical part to play in that.
You mentioned it earlier, but I want to go back to it because I've been a pastor for nearly 40 years. You write about homophobia and transphobia, and then you talk about internal homophobia and transphobia. Can you just go more into depth? Because I thought this was profound, and it's going to be very helpful to me.
Well, I think people don't realize that just because you're gay or non-binary or trans doesn't mean you don't have that homophobia or transphobia still living inside of you. We're trained that way from the time that we're born, unless you are for most people, unless they're adopted, they grow up in a family that looks like them. They've got their mom's eyes or their dad's smile, But if you are adopted or you're LGBT, you grow up and you start realizing, well, I don't look like that. I don't fit that norm. That doesn't. And so you start having these seeds of shame that are planted inside of you that, unless you have something that counteracts them, they just continue to grow. So the parents that are now training their kids that diversity is beautiful and is to be celebrated, those kids are going to have no problem growing up because they know that those things are valued. But for people like us who have not had that as the norm, and you've seen that as kind of when you've been taught to hate a group of people, and then that group of people is you start to hate yourself. And so that grows inside of you. And until you have a truth that counteracts the lie, it's going to continue the cycle.
You wrote about turning on the radio one day and hearing Franklin Graham and James Dobson, and they were talking about LGBT, and it was horrible what they were saying. And you told me this morning that even now you will have that homophobia it'll just kind of shoot across your mind just quickly.
It doesn't, I don't think it ever goes away. When you've had 30 years of bad theology and teaching steeped into you, it takes a long time to get that out. But I think what's important is surrounding yourself with affirming people, because the more that you keep yourself in a non-affirming environment, the more you're going to replay those tapes of that who you are is bad. And so the more that you can steep yourself in an affirming place, the more that you're going to have those positive tapes that reinforce that who you are is to be celebrated and it is beautiful in the eyes of God. And I think that's where you need to spend the majority of your time. And that's a boundary issue, is learning how to navigate your way away from non-affirming places and into healthy places.
You said in the end of that segment, sadly, we've come to trust the conservative church more than we trust our inner voice. Mm-hmm. And we have to learn to trust that inner voice that says, this is how I am. This is how I was made this way. This is beautiful me. This is me.
Yeah, because I think we've been taught as evangelical or conservative Christians that whoever your pastor is or whoever's in authority over you is the voice of God. And they are 100% right, and you need to just absorb that into your life instead of listening to that inner voice that you have of the Holy Spirit inside of you that's telling you who you are. And I think that we often negate that in lieu of trying to trust the bigger voice of God that we've heard from a stage or a platform or a person, instead of trusting the voice of God within us.
I love that you gave to people who were contemplating coming out, you gave them some thoughts, and I can tell you're very, that you had thought it through when you were going through it, so I thought it was beautiful. You talk about the importance of an affirming community, and I'm guessing for you that was that initial church that you found in Denver, and you talked about a good therapist. And these are things that you would recommend, I guess, to anyone. If they're struggling with coming out, these are pieces that are important to have. A close friend, a pet, a small group, and then you said a hotline. And I thought that was interesting. I guess even with everything good, there's times that you just think, I can't make it, I cannot do this.
Well, and not everybody has a close knit of friends that they feel safe to reach out to. Okay. And so knowing that a hotline is available is a comfort to a lot of people, and there's no shame in that. In fact, they just recently, a few months ago, I think, created a text hotline where you don't even have to be on the phone. You can text and receive via text a hotline as well, which I think the younger generation really appreciates. So there's even more options opening up.
You talked about welcoming and affirming, and I know we've talked about it before here, but can you just kind of give us your take on the welcoming and affirming church thought, because some people don't know the difference?
Yeah, so you want to find an affirming church that celebrates all of who you are, because what we're seeing now is that a lot of the conservative evangelical churches are pulling from these churches, trying to use the same lingo and kind of, sneakily get by and make everybody think that they're welcome when they're really not. So they'll say, well, everybody's welcome. But what they mean is, well, you're welcome to sit in the pews and give your tithe and maybe serve in a lesser role like hospitality. But when it comes to serving on the worship team or in the children's ministry or getting married, they draw a line. And so what is happening is that people are going in thinking they're safe, and building relationships and starting to put down roots and then realizing they're really not. And that makes them think that they're second-class citizens because they're still not being treated equally. And two, it's re-traumatizing a group of people that's already been very traumatized by the church. And so I think finding an affirming community that is truly safe and will embrace you is very critical. And I'm very thankful for Church Clarity because of that, because you can go on and search for a church in your area and find out where they stand on LGBT, will they hire women in ministry, and it's very clearly outlined. So you know exactly where they stand. And Church Clarity isn't asking people to change their stance. They're asking them to be transparent about their stance so that people know before they arrive what to expect, and so they don't get in the door and then end up more damaged than before they came in.
You wrote a lot about boundaries, and you spoke about it just a moment ago. That is something that really has to be, you have to really get good at that, I'm guessing, or it'll kill your soul.
Yeah, and that's a lot of practice because we're not taught boundaries.
No.
Nobody likes boundaries. Boundaries are hard. Boundaries are uncomfortable. And for me, I had never been taught how to set healthy boundaries. And so when I started doing it, it was just as hard for me to do it as it was for and my parents didn't like it either because I had never done that before. So it was just as hard for them to accept it as it was for me to do it. And yet it was necessary for the safety of my mental health and my physical health, and so navigating that I think is different for each person what those boundaries look like, but I think it's important to find that for yourself and what you need to do for yourself to keep yourself mentally and physically safe and healthy.
You wrote about coping with conditional love. You're taught your whole life unconditional love. It's all about unconditional love. You even said in the first book, you said your mom said to you, Amber, friends will come and go, but your family will always be there for you.
Yeah.
And then you realize not necessarily so. That had to be tough.
Yeah, I mean, that was something my mom said all the time. That was a very common household saying, So I grew up expecting and believing it to be true. And when I realized it wasn't, that was just devastating because I was taught that the love of God was unconditional and that the love of my parents was unconditional. And yet when it came down to it, they didn't believe that either of those were true because they believed that in order to get to heaven, you had to be A, B, and C. You had to be straight or celibate or one of these things that you had to follow. And in order to be loved by them, I had to be one of those things. And so it came with strings attached. It wasn't truly unconditional love in their eyes.
When I read that book, and everything was kind of still separate, family was not together, and then I read this book. Has the family come back together any? Is it kind of resembling something that's where they're accepting and they're getting it?
No, we have been completely estranged since I got married. So we have had no contact whatsoever. And that goes for all of my family, my parents, my brother, my extended family, my grandparents. We just have no contact.
It is amazing to me because I look at you and I think everybody in the world would be so proud. They should be so proud. And to know that the people that were closest to you, they can't get it yet. And I'm just going to hold out hope that they can get it because they should be so proud, so very proud. You did something I thought was brilliant. You took Kubler-Ross. You familiar with Kubler-Ross, who wrote the stages of death?
Grief.
And grief, she talks about when you find out you were going through grief, you go through anger, you go through these stages. But you adapted it for LGBTQ. Can you talk just a minute about that? Because I thought that was very helpful too.
Well, I tried to adapt it for LGBTQ people because you do go through, the majority of LGBT people go through some degree of grief and loss. It's different for every person. Some have more than others, but you do go through that. And so I tried to adapt it and give examples of what it may look like during each stage to help them identify that and to help their loved ones understand what it's like to be in their shoes. Even at the end of every chapter in Unashamed, I have a section for parents and allies to know how you can support your loved one at that point in their coming out process and what would be most helpful. So I try to give as many tools, not only to the LGBT person, but to their parents and allies as well.
We're going to do some Q&A in just a few minutes, but we're going to actually close down the live stream that we're doing. But before we do, would you just look maybe straight ahead into the camera back there and just talk to maybe that LGBT person who maybe is contemplating coming out but is just afraid, doesn't know if it's going to work out. Can you just talk to him just a moment?
You know, I want you to know that you're not alone. You're not nearly as isolated as you feel. There are so many people that are so ready and willing to gather around you and support you. You just got to reach out for them. And I want you to know that God loves you and God smiles on you, and you are completely and fully loved by God exactly as you are, and there's nothing that you have to do to change that or to earn it. It is truly unconditional love. And I want you to be able to embrace who you are fully and to really know that God embraces you.
It has been an honor to get to talk to you. It has been truly amazing. And I want to say to you, if you're watching, I want to tell you, if you feel like this is helpful to someone you know, you share this link with them and let them watch it. It'll be online forever. Let people watch this, because they will not hear a more articulate expression of coming out and being a Christian and understanding the beauty of all of this. And so please make sure you do that. Amber, I'm telling you, I feel like I have made a lifelong friend. I feel like just knowing you today, I have made a friend that is going to be lifelong. You are awesome. Did you enjoy Amber? Was this beautiful? Beautiful. All right, why don't we stretch just a minute? Everybody stand up and then sit back down, because what we want to do is we want to get into some questions. So we'll turn the house lights up just a little bit, and then we want to give you a chance to ask questions. And so there's a microphone right here. Alejandro has it. And we just ask you to come and ask your question to Amber, and then the next person be ready. And we'll do this about 30 minutes, and then we're going to break and give you a chance to talk and mingle and get coffee and cookies, and also buy these books. If you haven't bought these books, please buy them. And I want to say a word. Affinity Atlanta has made this possible. And so can we just give it up? Affinity Atlanta is one of the great groups anywhere. And I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to just let whoever would like to ask the first question to Amber to just come to the microphone.
Don't be shy. You can ask me anything.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question about self-care. What does that look like for you in this journey, and how have you done it?
I think self-care has been different things at different times. Earlier last year or so, I was really into floating. Are you guys familiar with like the float tanks that you go and lay in? And
So that's helpful. I've seen those.
yeah, it was super helpful. It was very therapeutic for me, because it's just like a little bitty room tank thing that you go lay in, and you float in this Epsom salt, and you can't not float. There's like no possibility of drowning. You just lay there and float, and it's super like relaxing. It's a 90-minute thing. I found it to be very therapeutic, and I was doing that last year. Like that was my thing. So I think that was kind of where I was. You know, like self-care has been different things in different times, but I really enjoyed that. Right now, it's a little bit of learning how to manage my schedule a little differently. I'm trying to work my way back into some musical stuff, doing some reading. You know, it's just different things in different seasons. It's been therapy for me at some seasons. It's been hiking during different seasons. So I think you just got to find what works best for you, and whatever that is, do that, because therapy is therapy for different people in different ways at different seasons.
And I don't know if you know this, she works full time and then goes and speaks all over the place. And we're hoping that through people supporting around the country who see the importance of this, and by the way, we need to tag that video. We'll make sure we put a tag on that, because I want people to know that she would be a lovely person to support, so she can go tell her story more, because she is spinning plates like crazy trying to do this and also be home and work her regular job. A great question, Alejandro. Somebody else.
Hey, Amber, Lowell here. So I must confess I have not read your books yet, but I plan on doing so. So if this is in your books, I apologize. Did anyone in your conservative, focus on the family environment offer to go alongside you in a study or discovery, I guess along the lines of theology, things that you had been learning, discovering as you were integrating your faith and your sexuality? And reason I ask is because my father has drawn that wall and has not expressed a willingness to learn or discover with me. And anytime that's suggested, the response is, I'm not going to entertain anything that's attempted to indoctrinate me into your false beliefs, right? So there's that clear dividing line. Mm-hmm. Did you run into that with anyone in your life? Were you able to jump past that point with anyone? Did it stay there? Did you find anyone who was willing to come along with you in a learning and a discovery process? I'm just curious if you had dealt with that.
My family is very much where your father is. It's like we can't even entertain, like I think they hypothetically would say like, well, we've read books from both sides, but not really,
Right.
like there was never a point where they were truly open to like really having a discovery process of what that journey might look like. Mm-hmm. They would have happily gone along with me to conversion therapy.
Right.
But I wasn't willing to go along with that. So there really was never any point where we journeyed together and did any kind of discovery with anybody in my family. Like my parents, once they cut me off, everybody cut me off. And so I have had one family that I grew up with that have done a full 180 since hearing my story. Like they knew my family, we were very close, and they have fully come around and become really strong allies in the community. And so that's probably one of the only stories like that I have of like reconnecting with somebody on the other side. Like there's been a few people that I've reconnected with on the other side, but for them to really, like, just to watch this transformative journey where they've really gone from, like, when I first reconnected with them, it was like, I don't know how I feel about all this, but I love you. And, and then it went to, like, okay, we're listening to the liturgists and we're trying to figure this out, and and then it went to like last time I saw them, they were spouting off acronyms like like they had it down, they were on it, and so it's been really cool to like watch their whole transformation journey. And I stay with them every time I go to their town, and it's just been really neat and meaningful to see how they've grown. But it's one of the only stories that I have like that, and they're not relatives. It was a family friend. So, yeah, I think it's hard, and you can't do it for them. They have to want to do the work.
Right.
And so I think until they reach a point, if and when they reach a point, to be willing to really do it with open eyes, you can't force it on them.
Right.
And like with my parents, they may or may not ever get there, And I think you have to do what is best for you in your life. You can't keep waiting on them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You gotta take care of yourself and your own soul, and cultivate a healthy life for yourself, regardless of where they decide to stand.
Okay. Thanks. Appreciate
That
that.
was a great question. It has been interesting to me. When I first kind of began to understand some of this, I really thought people were going to get it kind of quickly. And so my wife and I, like 11 or 12 years ago, we just thought, man, 6 months, most everybody we know is going to understand this and accept it. And what we discovered is we could not convince anybody. We could bring out the best books. We could bring out the best speakers. We could introduce them to Amber. We could do all these things. And if they weren't ready, Jesus could have been standing in front of them, and they would not have gotten it.
Yeah, they
and
have to be
when
ready.
they're ready. So another question. Great questions.
Amber, my name is Rory.
Hi, Rory.
One thing is, I don't understand the aspect of not having unconditional love for your children. So that's beyond me. But as you've been going through this journey, and obviously you have a long journey ahead of you, there's a healing process that's been going on as well. Obviously that's going to go on, but what's next in your journey?
In my personal journey?
With healing and with working through this. Obviously, the books obviously help you as well.
Right.
And getting out there and talking and telling your story as hard as that can be. But, what do you do next?
I think for me personally, the thing I'm doing next is bringing music back into my life. Music was a very big part of my life growing up. My mom came from a musical family that traveled and sang and did albums and stuff. So she was very musical, and she taught us to be very musical from a very, Like when I could speak, I was singing in church, you know? And so we did like tours, and like I was telling Ray earlier today, like my brother and my mom and I were doing like full-on concerts in elementary school, like recitations and harmony and full-on concerts at retirement homes and churches and Christian schools, and that was just a huge part of my life. And then I entered New Life, where worship music was so big, and I led worship there, and I did all these things, and I had 13 years of classical training on the piano, and I did all these things. And then when I came out, that stopped. I was teaching piano lessons. People pulled their kids from lessons with me. I obviously wasn't allowed to lead worship anymore. And so music just kind of came to a halt in my life. And I did for a short season when I moved to Denver, was a part of a chorus, but I haven't been really I don't feel like I've been musically active in about a decade. And so my journey right now is rediscovering that and figuring out what that looks like on this side of deconstruction, and how to bring what was good from those years forward, and make it new in a way that feels healing to me. And so my wife, about a year and a half ago, for my birthday, gave me a recording set. And so we have set up a whole studio in one of the rooms in our house. And I was telling Ray today, I was like, it's been a slow process to soundproof a room and to get all the equipment and to figure out Pro Tools, which, oh my gosh, is like a massive program, But I've started writing some original music and recording that. And I plan, if I can get, all my ducks in a row to where I can spend more time, as Ray was talking about, more time invested in here and less in doing another side job and that kind of thing. I plan to invest more time in writing and producing some music that is not only healing for me, but hopefully healing for other people. Because we're seeing a big shift right now in progressive Christianity, but music is not caught up yet. And so we do not have very many good musicians or worship songs or whatever you want to call it that you would use in progressive spaces. The church that we're attending now just announced a few weeks ago that they're no longer going to sing any Hillsong or Bethel music, and not support them in any way because of their new campaign on conversion therapy. And so that, that's great. I think that's a great decision to make. And now they're like, and now we have nothing to sing, And so they're like holding a meeting. Actually, I'm going to miss it. They're holding a meeting tomorrow to like gather all their musicians and be like, okay, what are we going to sing now? And we got to write some music. And what are we going to do? Because nobody's really done that yet. There's a lot of work to be done there. And so I think there's a part of me that wants to invest in that. And part of me wants to do it for myself too, because that's something that brings me joy. So I think that's kind of part of my self-care, and part of my healing process next is trying to reclaim something that's very important to me. Because I think what I realized too was that worship was my connection to God. And when they took away my worship, they took away that connection that I had. And so trying to reclaim that in a way that's fresh and healing for me.
We have a den in our home with a piano, and I invited Amber over. We did a podcast this morning and invited her over, and just watching her sit and play and sing, it was glorious. I wish you all could have been there. Next time y'all come on over to the house too. It was really, really wonderful. It was great. Somebody else.
I was wondering, because I grew up in a very similar background with you. I was raised in basically like a cult of Southern Baptist, very fire and brimstone, and you were talking about you still have those internal self-doubts about homophobia on the inside and everything. And I was wondering, what do you do personally when you start having those thoughts? Because I still have them sometimes. I'm like, what if I'm wrong? What if I am going to hell?
I think the biggest thing is to make sure you're surrounding yourself in an affirming place, kind of like I was saying earlier, because when you do that, you're helping negate those tapes more and more. Be careful what kind of music you listen to, what kind of books you read, what kind of voices you allow into your head. And if you're putting good seeds in, eventually those bad ones are going to dwindle and you're going to have more and more. They may not be completely gone. But the more you expose yourself to those things, the more you're going to doubt yourself, the more those things are going to play in your head. And I think just finding, whether it's a quote or a scripture or a mantra or something that you can keep for yourself that reminds you who you are and to value who you are, that you can have, that you can lean on, whatever that is for you, you know. Sometimes I'll have like a word for the year that I lean on, and that kind of has an overarching theme to my year, and I'll like write it on a rock and put it in my office, or, you know, like different things that I've done to kind of help remind me that have been helpful at different seasons. So, but I think the biggest component is making sure that what you're feeding into yourself is positive, affirming messages from the music you listen to and the things that you attend and the people that you interact with, because those will help heighten the positivity more than anything else.
Great question. Great.
Hi, my name is Natalia, and thank you so much for being here and sharing your story with us. I haven't read your books yet, but I will read one of your books, your books. So for me, one of the things that has helped me is resources, reading Rachel Held Evans, reading Dr. Gushee, David Gushee, and other resources and books. Of course, that's what has helped me through my journey. So what would you say, and of course your books plus your experience, what other resources would you say that have helped you through your journey as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of great resources right now, and so I'm really thankful for that because it's really grown over recent years. Dr. Gushee is a great one. I'm actually going to spend tomorrow and Monday with him, so I'm very excited. But his resource, I think, is in terms of the faith and sexuality component is a really good one. Unclobber by Colby Martin is another great one that's very easy to read and understand in terms of your faith and sexuality and kind of the clobber passages and how those things work. If you go on my website, I have a list of a lot of different books that I recommend, different organizations that I think are great, podcasts that I recommend. You know, if you haven't tapped into like Queerology, the podcast with Matthias is great. Q Christian Fellowship has done a lot of great work. If you've never been to one of their conferences, it's a fantastic experience. It's every January, and it will be in Albuquerque this next year. And they do, it's an awesome opportunity to get together with other LGBT Christians and pastors and allies from all over. Really, they come from all over the world. So people that come together and you spend like 4 days just learning and growing together and workshops on everything under the sun that you could think of. And so it's a great place to network and to make friends and to see people that are like you. And they've got different affinity gatherings for transgender people or people of color, and so you have different places where you can connect and meet people that are like-minded. So I think that's a great resource. I'm trying to think of any other books off the top of my head. I do love Matthias's Queerology. He just released a book this month called Beyond Shame, and so you could check that out. But yeah, I try to keep a fairly updated resource list. Is there a specific area that you're looking for a resource in, or just kind of in general?
Just in general,
Yeah.
and also to share with some of my friends.
Yeah.
Because I can't I can't live their experience. They have to experience that for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But give them books that will help them as well. So
Another memoir that I would highly recommend is Vicki Beeching's Undivided. Okay. It's one of my absolute favorites. So if you haven't gotten that one, it's one of the best out there, I think.
Good. That's a wonderful question.
thank you.
Wonderful.
Hi, I'm Hayden.
Hi, Kate.
So I'm going to try and do this without crying because that's the thing. So earlier you mentioned about setting that boundary with your parents. And I was wondering how you did that. Now, my situation's a little different because I currently live in their house. But I recently came out as non-binary, and they understood my sexuality thing, but they didn't really understand the whole gender thing. And my dad's like, they, them isn't a thing, and this, that, and the other. So they refuse to use my name, and they refuse to use my pronouns. So it's I've been trying to find that line of a boundary, but I found it difficult to do it when I'm still living in their house. So I was wondering what you thought about that.
How old are you?
21.
Okay. I would say it's hard, obviously.
Yeah.
It's hard to be in their home. As you slowly make steps to be on your own, you want to make sure that you've got financial stability,
Yeah.
a safe place to live, like all those things are things you kind of want to be thinking towards, and that may be a direction you want to start kind of heading,
Yeah.
because you want that healthy environment where you can grow and you can be accepted and you're not always having to correct them or to, but it is hard when you're living in their home to set those boundaries. I think you'll find it easier when you're on your own to be able to do that, but still, I think reminding them, if they use the wrong pronoun, correct them in the moment instead of letting it slide. Because the longer you let it slide, the more they're going to get away with it, the more common it's going to become. So the more that you can kind of just correct it in the moment and just bring attention to it, I think may be helpful, just as a reminder to them, that this isn't going away. This is who I am.
Yeah.
And do it in a kind, respectful way, but just remind them. And it's hard. It's hard to have to set those boundaries, especially with your family, and especially when you live there. It's a lot. But are they open to meeting other people or networking? Because connecting them with other, mama bears and things is also very helpful for them to find the support that they need.
Because I think the biggest thing is they're my mom always says people are allowed to have their own beliefs. When I call my dad out on saying something or whatever, and it's well, yeah, they're allowed to have their own beliefs, but it can't diminish me as a human being.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And
I think that's where I'm trying to work with her.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like later on she would be open to it, but I guess I'm just afraid of she's going to be oh, you're trying to change my beliefs on this.
Yeah, and it's hard when it's about the core of who you are.
Exactly.
I do have a whole chapter in Unashamed specifically on boundaries and on, terms you should use and terms you should not use. And part of that as your job is to model it well, to use the right terms, to use the right vocabulary so that you're modeling it for them, and hopefully eventually they'll start becoming more accepting towards that. But if not, you stand in who you are, and hopefully when you are able to get out on your own, you'll have more freedom to be able to express yourself, to be able to feel comfortable and safe. But that all is going to be a journey, and it's a tough one. And I'm sorry, because I know it sucks right now.
Thank you.
But just stay true in who you are and surround yourself with good, positive people as much as you can. These are good people. So surrounding yourself with those people and having them in your life is wildly transforming and helpful. So
thank you.
Great question.
There's been a lot of tension in my family since my sibling came out. I grew up in a very, very freakishly similar situation to you, so I understood everything you were saying at the beginning. And my parents have not reacted like your parents have. They are not estranged from my sibling. They love her in spite of who she is, but not because of all of who she is. And so I feel very strained being in the middle, because I love both of them dearly. I understand my parents' position because that's how they raised me, and it seemed very loving, but I also have totally flipped my way of thinking because I love my siblings so much.
Right.
How do you suggest I be a good bridge for them? Because they really are trying to love her. They are. But there's so much tension and pain and unsaid things, and I don't quite know how to be that bridge. I feel so pulled both ways.
Yeah, that's a hard place to be. Are your parents connected to any support groups at all?
They are not.
Are they willing to be?
I've thought about asking if they wanted to go to a PFLAG meeting with me. We have one close by, and I know my mom went to therapy for a little bit, and that was helpful for her, but it was with a Christian therapist. So she just affirmed all of those negative thoughts.
Yeah, right.
Helped her with her feelings, but,
Yeah.
So.
If she's open to being connected to the Mama Bear group, that is a place where she would find tremendous support, because there's, people all over the nation that, and she can be in a private group where nobody knows that she's in there, and she can ask questions and she can get support from people. And so if she's open to that, that could be a really great thing for her, to be able to find that support. And there's a few books out there for parents but also reading memoirs of other people's stories, I think, is very transformative, because it takes it from a place of theology down to something that's very personal and hits home for them. And sometimes hearing stories like that can be very transformative for people, or at least plant the seed for something to happen later. if they're open to reading books, there's, like Unclobber, I think is probably one of the best that would be very accessible on that level of, he tells his story as an evangelical pastor, and then he talks about a Clobber verse, and then he tells more about his story. And so it goes back and forth a lot, and it's very easy to journey. And some of those kind of steps might be helpful for them. Your sibling, you just love her, you just be there for them as much as you possibly can, because they need that support. I know it's got to be hard to be stuck in the middle, and I think that's where my brother was as well, because I think he felt stuck in the middle, but he very much sided with my parents, and I have no contact with him. And so I think just knowing that you're there for them and you love them and you support them is going to make a big difference in their life. You're already doing it. You're here. You're wanting to go to PFLAG. You're wanting to do those things. Those are the best things you can do to support them. And I think that will make all the difference in the world. And it's, it's not your job to educate your parents, but as much as you can point them in the right direction towards these resources, it will only help them along in the process.
Thank you.
Allies, you wrote about it last week or earlier this week. So we have quite a few in the audience. What would you like to say or give advice as to how to be a good ally?
I knew somebody was going to bring this up.
You knew it was going to be.
I knew it was coming. Being a good ally is important. I did just write a piece this week on how to be a good ally. And I think one of the best, you have the opportunity for several things. One of them is, I think you need to use your voice to speak up for the marginalized, because you have an opportunity to, because of your privilege, to speak up and to be a voice for people that may not have that opportunity. So using your voice to speak up is important, and that is what helps people recognize you as an ally in the community and a safe person, is when you speak up, and when not only your speech is, not only what you say, but what you do and how you bring that. Those things have to be congruent with one another. You have to speak up, and your life has to follow. So the things that you engage in, the places that you give your money, that, we have people that are still giving to non-affirming churches. The cycle's not gonna stop if you still give your money to non-affirming churches. You need to invest in these small communities of affirming churches that, are struggling to survive because people don't come every week anymore, and tithing looks different in progressive communities. And so you need to be giving your money to those places to help them thrive. Support artists, support people that are doing this work on the ground. Use your money in those places and not be using them in places that is going to continue the cycle of homophobia or hatred or whatever this is. So I think those are two big opportunities that you have to use your voice for the marginalized, and to use your life, make sure your life is congruent with that, the kind of things that you attend, the places you give your money, where you spend your time. I think those things are so important to be a strong ally, and to be, we've talked about this a lot recently, and if you read my posts, I have some strong feelings about it, but allies are important. They're an important part of our community, but you can't stay silent and comfortable in your privilege and still call yourself an ally. It's gonna cost you something, and that's okay, but we need you to join us. We need allies to come along, but that only comes when you're willing to be a little uncomfortable, which people don't like very much.
If I can add to that, as a pastor, I have people that they're friends, but I had to realize they're preachers, and I had to realize several years ago that I couldn't have them speak here anymore. I love them. We have dinner together, and that's great. But some of the most precious people I know are those siblings here in the LGBT community, and to have someone speak here who doesn't affirm them and doesn't believe that they are just as beautiful in their gayness as we are in our straightness. Somebody who can't get that, I can't let them speak here.
Yeah.
Just can't. And so, because I'm still, I want to be a good ally, and I haven't figured it all out yet, but I really want to be. But that was just something for me over the last couple of
Yeah.
years. I thought, well, dang, I got to strike him off the list. I didn't know that, but I have to, and so
Yeah,
it's all
and
right.
it's hard. It's a hard. I mean, I just had to pull some resources off my website this week because of some things that happened, and I was like, I cannot support them because of their stance on this, and that's a hard thing to do. And it doesn't mean that you don't still build relationships with them to help them realize those things, but you don't do it on a public platform, and you don't recommend them to other people because people look to you to be a voice and to be a safe place for them. And if you're recommending somebody that is not safe, then it's going to damage your credibility and the way people look at you to be safe.
Yeah, and I would never want to hurt someone. I never would want to hurt someone in our congregation if they thought, you mean they don't accept us and they're speaking here? Great question, though. Great question.
Yeah,
Somebody else.
it does a lot of damage.
So I've been listening to your book, Unashamed, which I wish you read now that I know that you were like a voiceover on
Yes,
the Odyssey
I
thing.
do too. I will tell you that
Next book.
it was lovely that they took my request so seriously, but it was literally like, can we please do an audiobook? Yes. And by the time they said yes, like they had already contracted it and it was releasing in a month. And I was like, and I wanted to read it. Well, it's too late. We already had
Well, maybe
I love that you're so eager, but could we have slowed down one step?
maybe
it
you could
literally happened
record
like
it
that.
and do it your Patreon subscribers. Anyway,
Oh, that'd be cool.
So one of the things, and I hope this doesn't come out the wrong way, but we've talked a lot about being LGBT and trying to help your faith community understand and having people who love Jesus learn to love LGBT. But the other side is being in the LGBT community and interfacing with people who don't love Christ. And so how do you navigate that? And, knowing that now I'm part of a community, but there are places I don't really feel welcome or I feel judged for being a Christian because there's so much trauma and hurt associated with that.
Yeah, that's
What do you say to that?
I say it's a tough place to be. and I try to broaden it a bit and even talk to I use the term people of faith instead of Christians because a lot of people have identified differently now when they come on the other side. Maybe they don't identify as Christian, but maybe they still love God, or maybe they don't go to church anymore, or maybe they're an atheist, or maybe they're agnostic, or maybe, I've had people all over the spectrum reach out to me. And so I kind of wish we could have, again, broadened it to people of faith. But they felt like my audience was more Christian, so they wanted to keep the Christian thing. But yeah, I think it's a tough place to be. But I think we've realized our job is not to proselytize to them, we just be who we are and we let them be who they are. And you don't have to prove anything more to them than you have to prove to the Christians that you're gay. You just live who you are and you do it in spaces where you're comfortable and you're free, and you don't have to prove to the people who hate you for being Christian that it's okay to love God. You don't have to people that hate you for being gay that you can, just be who you are and surround yourself in places where that feeds your soul, and then whatever energy you have to invest in those other places, invest it there. But I think it's a balance of, not that you want to silo yourself, because that's not the point either, but you want to make sure that you're healthy and mentally healthy, physically healthy, having good support around you that makes you healthy and whole, and then whatever energy you have to invest in those other places where you feel led to do that.
Y'all stay around, talk as long as you want, drink and eat all these cookies and have a blast. One more time, Amber Cantorna. Thank you. Thank you.
That was great.